From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Hey everybody, I'm Matt Shares, the CEO of SBI, here for another episode of SBI TV, and I am thrilled to welcome one of the leaders of our TMT practice, Gregg Blatt, who Gregg and I are going to be spending some time together. We're going to be talking about TMT, specifically unified communications and collaboration. And Gregg spends a lot of time leading this vertical for us. And as SBI's research has come out on what market-leading CEOs are doing to prepare their teams for a resurgence to growth or a continued acceleration into growth, I wanted to bring Gregg in to spend some time chatting about this, but also sharing some key insights from what the research told us. G-Pa, good to see you, brother.
Good to see you. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah.
Exposing my nickname to the world.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Yes. And for those that are watching and listening, Gregg is a grandpa, so we have shortened his name from extended his name from G to G-Pa. So, Gregg, you spent 25 plus years as an operator in the field. We've spent the last few years together here at SBI, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, you've been one of the leaders of our TMT practice. There has been an unbelievable amount of demand, obviously in and around communication and collaboration. But I guess as we think about companies preparing for 21 and thinking about this pragmatic approach, which has been a theme that you and I spoke about, maybe just talk a little bit about some of the key demand drivers that you're seeing in the vertical and just sort of your observations from the amount of work that you've been doing.
So if you think about demand drivers in UCaaS, right, the obvious is work from home. The shift to work from home is significant, right? Yeah. And the thing about that is it's the norm.
Yeah.
It's the requirement then in terms of drivers becomes an integrated collaboration tool and not just video conference or conference call capability. It's a collaboration tool overall. And then third is the need for real-time feedback in terms of the quality of the tools that they're using and how they're all integrated, because it's the norm now that you communicate with your customers, your internal stakeholders, all through video and real-time collaboration. So I think those are the key drivers is, work from home and collaboration and real-time feedback.
So Gregg, as we looked at the research and specifically over the past 6 months, I mean, this is very real time, just based on the market conditions. The three trends that have jumped out to us, obviously this concept of digital evolution versus transformation and how COVID's been a forcing function, right? The second one is changes to the buyer and customer experience, which we're going to talk about, and then the concept of virtual selling. So I guess when you think about digital evolution versus transformation, specific to the UCaaS vertical, anything that you would share for those CEOs who are sitting here watching and listening to this going, how should I be thinking about pragmatically focusing my growth engine for 21?
Yeah, I mean, typically this part of the TMT space moves a little slower than maybe software or other pieces of technology.
Yep.
What's happening now is there's a requirement to shift from evolution to transformation. And so what does that mean, right? The number of tools and collaboration components that are required to get sold as a part of a solution as people go back to the office and then they integrate back to home. If you think about that, these organizations need to transform what they're selling quickly. And so that means instead of taking a couple of years to build a component that'll bolt onto their solution, they need to think about wiping off the development of that solution and going and buying one that complements their suite. So I think it's a rapid transformation, maybe a bad word, from evolution to transformation. It needs to happen with speed.
Gregg, how about when you think about like the demands of buyers and customers in the vertical and what they're expecting? I mean, if you contrast it now to February, and if I'm a CEO leading a business in the space, what should I be thinking about now?
Yeah. So great example is this interview. 6 months ago, I'd be sitting next to you
Yeah.
and we'd be having a conversation. So what are my expectations, right? In terms of me as a buyer of
Yep.
this technology, what we're using today, it has to work. It has to be clean, right? Because this is the expectation. So the buyer's expectation is extreme, right? The experience has to be high level, and how you consume, and I know we'll talk about that as well, but how it's consumed and how the buyer is buying is very different as well, which requires the seller to sell differently. So, look, 6 months ago, phone service or video conference was the norm.
Yeah.
Now, integrated desktop, all kinds of pieces of technology are the new norm.
So Gregg, maybe talk about that, because the third big component is virtual selling, right? And every industry is trying to figure out how to run their commercial organization with virtual salespeople and what that means. We've been talking about, quote, inside sales, virtual sales for a long time, and now we have this forcing function. So from the standpoint of those reimagining their organizations for 21, can you talk maybe a little bit about whether it's how people are thinking about partners, how people are thinking about agents, how people are thinking about their marketing organization, like things that are jumping out to you, specific to the space?
Yeah. So first, if you think about virtual selling and you're selling the UC product line, you're obviously needing to eat your own dog food, and you're selling on the platform. You're presenting what you're selling on the platform that you're selling. So the virtual selling model for all of these organizations is a matter of using their own tools to sell what they're, what they sell. So that's one point. Second point is there's like a blend now between inside and outside sales.
Yes.
And the question is, when we go back to whatever the new normal is, how does that blend change? And does the outside seller become more of an inside seller in terms of the dynamics of what they do every day? And that's going to require a different level of technology. And you and I have talked about this a couple of times. Access to people when I don't have to schedule a meeting is very different today. So if you think about virtual selling, you need to be prepared and you need to be able to be relatively dynamic, because your access, I may get to a person this week that I couldn't get to for months if I had to get on their calendar and see them in their office.
So Gregg, let's click on that point, because I think we've seen, and as the research that you and the team did, there's this clear line between observers, right? About 2/3 of companies and CEOs are sort of reacting tactically with a point-counterpoint move with their sales force. And there's about 10% that are accelerating. They have put their foot down and they are widening the gap between themselves and the competition. So in the construct of virtual selling, you said something that was really interesting. It's almost like going back to normal. There's going to be more of a decentralized inside sales. I'm going to be on the phone and on video until I don't need to be. I'll be face-to-face, but I toggle between the modalities, as opposed to you're an inside sales guy and I'm an outside sales guy, right? And I eat first because I'm part of the enterprise team and you're behind a desk with a headset on. So as you think about that component, anything you can share, just contrasting maybe those accelerators versus those observers?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing from the accelerators or the market leaders is they're retooling their enablement to address this virtual mode.
Yes.
Right. And that's drastic, and it's happening with speed.
Okay.
So I would say that's one key thing. Second is they're looking at their product suite, different than go to market, but they're looking at their product suite and figuring out how to accelerate the integration of the components, right? And when you look at an observer, they may continue down the path of developing a product that may take maybe out 5, 6, 8 quarters. When you look at the market leader, they're wiping out that and going and buying something. And we just recently saw a situation where there was a company that was building a collaboration product. They stopped building it and went and bought one and integrated into their suite, and they did that in 60 days.
Ooh. That is a great example. So Gregg, something you said to me a couple weeks ago that I wanted to highlight, you introduced this concept a couple years ago in another engagement, was around this concept of a revenue growth office, and what an RGO is and what an RGO isn't. Maybe talk a little bit about that and why you're seeing accelerators use this RGO concept at pretty good success.
Yeah, so what's interesting about the RGO today and what we've seen over the past, say, 3 or 4 months is organizations standing up an RGO, which is Revenue Growth Office. Why are they doing that? Is they're trying to figure out different ways to drive growth. Mm-hmm. And when you do that with a cross-functional team and everyone spends time every single week in a cross-functional environment thinking about growth and being able to adapt and be agile about what's happening in the market, we some of us probably thought we'd be back to the office by now.
Yep.
Some of us probably think we're going to be back to the office next month. Some of the plans that were developed in April or May through the RGO to look at different markets, look at different segments, look at different ways to go after growth are going to be different. The strategy is going to be different. So we've been involved in a number of organizations where we've stood up revenue growth offices and put work streams around market and market segmentation with a COVID overlay, virtual selling like we talked about, and how do you enable virtual sellers differently? So the whole enablement platform and talent.
Yes.
And making sure that you're looking at talent, because there's a lot of people that are, potentially out there to pick up.
So Gregg, I guess my last point, and then I'll let you run because I know you're busy. You talk about talent and what's required to execute, a revenue growth plan or run this revenue growth office. In terms of the dynamics of the labor market and what you're seeing from a talent perspective in the vertical, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's changing all the time, right? And your typical traditional sellers in this space are, potentially being challenged by maybe, folks that are, less tenure, up and coming, because they're really good at using the technology and they're really good at understanding the technology. So I think there's a dynamic right now where you have some folks that are 5-10 years experience competing for jobs with folks that have 20 years of experience. And I think both can have a place, but it's really important that you look at what the requirements of the new normal looks like and align talent against that new normal, or what you expect to have new normal. And again, it sits inside the revenue growth office, and depending what happens over the next 6 months, you may continue to tweak what your talent profile looks like.
So if I read that back to you, Gregg, the ability for the team to be more dynamic with the allocation of talent sounds like one, but I think the other thing is, you talked about earlier in the show about getting access and generating meetings. I mean, sales and marketing have never been more blended than they are right now. To be a great quota-carrying salesperson, you actually have to be a great content marketer, because you can actually scale across multiple meetings, but the days of expecting marketing to do this and sales to do that, they've changed, because sales isn't running around making physical sales calls, jumping on airplanes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic on demand gen, right? What does demand gen mean? The shift in demand gen dollars, both on the sales and marketing side, we're seeing more than half of marketing budgets being applied to demand gen. And then that demand gen engine on the marketing side being 100% integrated into how sales is trying to generate demand. So
great insight. All right, man. Well, I know the report will be out, and people can read more about what their peers are doing, and specifically keying in on these accelerating CEOs, that last camp, and how they go from being an observer to an accelerator. So always good to see you, brother. And I look forward to seeing you live, hopefully not too far away. We can wear masks and sit 6 feet apart and watch some hockey.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you for your time.
Until next time, everybody. I wish you good luck as you try to move from being an observer to being an accelerator and following suit on some of the great things that Gregg laid out for us. Good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.